ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you at our webinar, Enhancing Local Global Dialogue for Sustainable Water and Solid Waste Management in Urban Areas, Implications for Trade and Cities Development. It is a webinar we are happy to co-organize on behalf of the Global Cities Hub with our partners, UNCTAD and Development and UN-Habitat, and speakers from UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, and hopefully our colleague from Accra, Ghana will join us as well. The reason we came up with this webinar is because very often when talking about cities and urban development, we talk about cities as hotspots for innovation and economic growth. We also discuss a lot digitalization and smart city developments. And sometimes we tend to forget that the basic well-being of the city's populations is as important as the technological development. And waste management is clearly one of the basic issues a city needs to handle, and city leaders need to deal with it on an everyday basis. But it's also an opportunity, and during our discussion, we would like to expand on both sides of this issue, the challenges and the opportunities it requires. Of course, waste management is also important because we know that cities are expanding, are growing, and by definition, it means that solid waste, wastewater, gas emissions are also increasing. And we would like to discuss with our distinguished speakers all these different aspects. Last but not least, it is an important issue because all the challenges we can solve at the local level for the well-being of the local population will at the end of the day contribute to our global efforts on sustainable development, our global efforts on bringing a better future. So today we will have the chance to listen to 5 speakers. Mr. Graham Alabaster, who is head of the UN-Habitat Geneva office, the organization dealing by mandate in the UN system of local governments and urban development. Ms. Mona Mohammed, who is program manager at the Life Cycle Initiative and Cities and Buildings Unit at the United Nations Economic Program. Mr. David Vivas, chief of section at the Ocean and Circular Economy Unit and the UN Trade and Development, who is also working a lot on blue economy, and we know that circularity and blue economy are often mentioned together. Mr. Enrique Pacini, also from UN Trade and Development. He is Economic Affairs Officer on Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Last but not least, Mr. Victor Kote, Deputy Director of Waste Management from the Mayor's Office in Accra, Ghana. I hope he will be able to join us soon. My name is András Szörényi. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at the Global Cities Hub, and it will be my pleasure to moderate today's discussion, which will go in 2 parts. First, I will invite our speakers to present the activities of their organization, and especially one aspect of waste management or emissions or sustainability or circularity, which is closest to their work and related to local and regional governments on the ground. And then Accra will present us a concrete example from the local level, and then we will open up a discussion where I invite the speakers to react on the concrete local needs, but also choosing from your questions, dear audience, to try to animate the discussion as we go forward. The webinar is recorded. Please be aware of that. And if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, and I will make my best to collect all the questions and invite our speakers to react to them. So without further ado, let me start by inviting you, Graham, to set us the scene, tell us how UN-Habitat is working with urban development, and based on your personal experiences in your previous capacities as an engineer, as a water manager, please, if you could also reflect on that aspect, that would be very nice. Please, 6-7 minutes the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andras, and delighted to be with you all today. Of course, waste management is an inevitable consequence of urbanization. And UN-Habitat, as the agency within the UN responsible for sustainable urbanization, of course, does quite a lot of work both on liquid and solid waste management. Both of these areas are embodied in the SDGs. The solid waste management is in Goal 11, the Sustainable Cities Goal, we like to call it. And of course, wastewater sits under Goal 6, which part of Goal 6. But very interestingly, in both of these SDGs, there are very clear guidelines, or very clear guidelines were set up for the monitoring of waste, which is the first time this really has been in a global monitoring strategy. The MDGs didn't include such detail on this. Why is it so important? Well, Andras has already said the urbanization rates going ahead exponentially. By 2050, nearly 70% of the people will live in an urban setting of some kind. But what's also perhaps more important, that of all the urban space that will exist in 2050, 60% of it has yet to be built. So we have a huge opportunity to influence the way future urban space, not just in big cities, but in small towns, in villages, how they expand, how the populations are catered for in terms of course, basic services, access to water, sanitation, and of course, more importantly, sanitation and waste management. So I'll talk a little bit about the monitoring of wastewater now. We, together with WHO, are the custodian agency who are tasked with supporting member states to measure the particular part of Goal 6, which is responsible for wastewater, 631. And we, since the beginning of the SDG monitoring period, have been looking to get good data on where we are. Unfortunately, even though we're midway through the SDGs, we still can't make a global estimate yet because we don't have enough data for all aspects of wastewater treatment. Our last update, which has just been published this year, 2024, shows that about 42%, only 42% of the world's wastewater is monitored in any sort of way. It's a bit higher for domestic wastewater, about 58%, but basically a large proportion, more than half, is still not accounted for. That's wastewater in total. If we look at industrial wastewater and non-domestic wastewater, we only have information equivalent to 8% of the world's population. So the sad reality is that even now, at this stage, midway through the SDGs, we still do not have a global estimate on 631, which is the SDG for wastewater. Of course, our teams at WHO and UN-Habitat continue to support member states. In the next reporting period, due in 2 years, we should be able to make a global estimate. But knowing the trends and the way things are going, we are still a long way off from reaching this SDG. And of course, this is very different to the goal for water and sanitation, which is separate to this wastewater. I'm talking about wastewater. So why is wastewater and the treatment of wastewater so important? Well, of course, the main reason is pollution. As the world gets climate extremes, we find that, of course, drought means there's water shortages. Also, because of extreme climate events, we find that water is polluted through flooding as well. So both extremes are bad for the management of wastewater. The pollution aspect, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you about, is still in many parts of the world, particularly very poor. It means that the poor wastewater contaminates freshwater resources, be they surface water, rivers, lakes, and streams, but also groundwater, which means that we actually reduce the amount of water that's available for people to consume. So wastewater, as we come in this increasingly dry world, water is going to become more scarce, and we need to look much more closely at reusing wastewater and how we can treat it effectively to reuse it for some to reduce the dependency on new freshwater resources. So wastewater is incredibly important for pollution as a source of additional water in times of water scarcity. And of course, looking at the broader climate agenda, we spend a lot of money treating wastewater. We have to revisit that to see, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also energy use to move wastewater around and treat it also needs to be reduced. So one way we've come up with this at UN-Habitat, we provide a lot of technical support to countries to enhance their management of wastewater and solid waste. And of course, the starting point is good monitoring. A lot of this responsibility for water and sanitation falls to the local level, falls to local authorities or utilities who are managed by local authorities. So we do a lot of work to support at the subnational level, the monitoring and the stimulation of investment for wastewater. Just in my final sort of couple of minutes, we have at the UN Water Conference back in 2023, together with several member states and some other UN agencies, come up with what we call Wastewater 2030, which is a commitment by member states and organizations to focus more on the treatment and management of wastewater. And there are 5 areas that we focus in on for this particular commitment. First is that we want to treat wastewater, tackle wastewater from all sources, highlighting, of course, the need to look more closely at industrial and non-domestic wastewater. We have to develop new infrastructure which is resilient to climate. Most sewage treatment works divert wastewater flow when a storm arrives. And this is one of the main reasons why, even in the developed economies, why our rivers, streams and beaches are polluted, purely because the design codes for wastewater treatment are out of fashion. This needs urgent attention and it's low-hanging fruit. The second area is we need a lot more inclusive policy for wastewater management, because of course, not everybody in the world has access to waterborne sanitation. We need to look at the on-site sanitation, the excreta management together with off-site and wastewater treatment. The fourth area we want is to promote good practice. Treating wastewater is not rocket science. There are many good examples around the world of treatment and good treatment processes and also governance processes. And we need to urgently work on looking at these good practices and stimulating investment for those member states and cities and countries who don't have infrastructure. And finally, an area which, of course, us, but also the other sister agencies in the UN are involved in, a more aligned international effort to bring attention to the member states more the importance of managing and treating wastewater to ensure a secure urban future. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham, also for setting the scene, but also for highlighting this valuable work on wastewater and to sharing with us also this disappointing picture on the results we have reached until now. It means there's room for improvement, and I hope that this discussion will also give us some hints on how to do it. Let me turn to you, Mona, and ask you to present the work of UN Environment Programme, and especially the work on circularity, on greenhouse gas emissions, and how you see the way forward in these areas. The floor is yours.
Okay, here you go. Thank you so much, Andres. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it clearly.
in slideshow mode? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so my name is Muna Muhammad, and I work for the Life Cycle Initiative hosted in UNEP, and I am actually here today representing 3 different initiatives within UNEP that have coalesced around circularity and whole life cycle approaches to the buildings space. So there's the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which most of you are familiar with, which was founded at COP21 and works on with the vision of a zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. They have quite a large membership between different sectors. Then there's the Life Cycle Initiative, which works on adopting whole life cycle approaches in the building, well, in different sectors, but my role is with the building sector. And then finally, there's the One Planet Network, which brings in the circularity side of the house, and they are tasked on SDGs, some parts of SDGs 12 and 8 with relation to circularity. So with these 3 different groups, we have developed a materials hub that really looks towards a whole life cycle approach for a circular built environment. And there, our approach really focuses on 3 prongs. First, it's to avoid buildings whenever possible, however possible. Then to shift to alternative building materials, and then of course to acknowledge that we will continue to build with concrete and steel and hard to abate materials overall, but how can we improve and decarbonize such materials? And of course, in each of these 3 prongs, we look at what would a life cycle analysis tell us when we shift to the use of alternative building materials, for example. What are other impacts that we might look or generate from a biodiversity perspective, for example, etc., etc. So those are the 3 things we really go for. And then from there, we've also identified 10 recommendations for 10 whole life cycle recommendations for the building's breakthrough. And you can access the QR code, which will show you what these 10 recommendations are. And you can also see them on the left-hand side of the screen. And on the right side, we've highlighted 4 of these recommendations that are really focused on circularity. The remainings focus on definitions, data accessibility, benchmarking, and interoperable products. And here we're looking at investment, prioritizing retrofitting, material circularity, and designing for circularity. So why are we doing all of this work? You've heard just before me that we're looking at 70% of the people by 2050 living in urban areas. And if we're talking about this from a resources approach, we're looking at extracting 190 billion tons. That's almost 2 times what we are what we were already extracting in 2017, and a little bit more. So and of course, with all resource extraction comes quite a lot of impact. So we're thinking about how to minimize that extraction. And that's where we define circularity from. So the key thing to take from here is that circularity is not about waste and waste recycling and waste reuse, but it's really about keeping materials at its highest value in the economy for as long as possible. And within it, we are looking at the triple planetary problem. So the biodiversity, the pollution, and natural resources, and the consumption of resources overall. But even beyond that, we're also looking at how do we engage all different actors along the value chain, using a life cycle thinking approach to make sure that we are seeing this disconnection between the extraction and the human well-being and reaching human well-being. And as we define human well-being, of course, we look at it from different perspectives. And that really ties in with SDGs 5, 3, and 8, looking at gender equality, looking at good health and well-being, as well as decent work and economic growth. But we're also looking at environmental impacts. So again, this goes back to the triple planetary crisis and resource efficiency overall. And so what do we do within the within this group, and what do we do in UNEP on this work? So this is an image that you might be familiar with in terms of considering the different parts of a life cycle of a building. But we're really keen on identifying where the decisions are made in that life cycle, as well as where are resources being used and inputted into this life cycle. And in particular, because we know that the construction sector consumes almost 50% of the material footprint across the economy. And so with this in mind, we've developed a national circularity assessment framework for buildings, which looks at assessing the building stock within one country, looking at how circular is their stock. And it looks both at enabling conditions, but it also looks at the economy and what is needed within the economy itself to make these changes. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I also invite you to check out the QR code, and I'll put all of these links in the chat as we move forward. And so just keeping this in mind, and since we only have 5 minutes to go, well, 5 minutes for this entire presentation, just wanted to flag that when we're talking about the circularity assessment framework, we're really looking at the building's stock. So be it the existing buildings, as well as what we envision in terms of flow and new buildings, but also we look beyond the building itself into what does it mean for the spatial and urban development, what are the strategic priorities within the country, and of course what implications would this have on the construction supply chain. And this was a project that we developed jointly in UNEP and UNOPS, and have now piloted in Senegal and Bangladesh this year, and have developed the circularity assessment framework toolkit and have put it online. We'd be really keen to hear from you if you're interested in piloting this also in your areas of work. And I just want to summarize by saying that the decisions that we make at the beginning of a life cycle of a building are those that have the highest impacts. And we might think of the life cycle from the moment we start the extraction, but we also need to step a little bit beyond that and really think about the value chain, to start thinking about the decisions that we make at the moment we decide that we have money to do this, and at the moment of the inception of a building. So we're really advocating for a sustainable public procurement program for buildings and construction sector, among other things that we do in this space. And I'm really happy to see what you all are working on as well.
Thank you very much, Mona, for this, I have to admit, short, because you would have been a lot to say, I'm sure, but very comprehensive overview. I think with all the construction of new cities and the development of existing cities, the construction waste is clearly a very important area to handle. And as you mentioned, the extraction of resources in a global scale is something that our small steps at the local level can add up in the negative or the positive way. Hopefully our discussion will contribute to the positive. Thank you very much for sharing the Circularity Assessment Framework initiative or project. And I encourage all our audience to comment on the needs where it can be helpful, and to contact you or UNEP if they would like to join and replicate it in their cities or countries. With that, I would like to turn to you, David. As mentioned, you are at representing UN Trade and Development. And by the way, you are one of the engines behind today's webinar. So once again, thank you for the great collaboration on that. And what I would like to ask you specifically is to present your work, the work of UNCTAD, but also what we hear a lot about the similarities or connections between circular economy, blue economy, green economy, all these relatively new approaches, how you see it, and how you see waste management from a local point of view in relation to trade and urban development. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andras. We will divide, I will do the part on water treatment, and my colleague Enrique will go into the solid treatment of waste. So we will divide the problem in two. I will be sharing a screen. 1 second while I'll share it. You tell me if you can see it. 1 second. Can we see it? Can we see it now?
Now it's perfect.
Thank you very much. The beauty of having both UN-Habitat and UNEP before is that makes my life easier in presenting some of the problems and the realities, you know. I think the element of urban population growing and also population as a whole in the planet growing, it's an important aspect because we will have to provide them with public goods and services, and sometimes the governments cannot complete that task fully. A significant problem regarding urbanization, and I think this is also linked to general pollution and human health, is that 80% of the waste, Graham didn't mention this number, but this comes from them, is that 80% of all waste is disposed improperly in urban areas. So this is a significant concern because we need to deal with a problem of pollution, but how to transform this, as mentioned by Mona, into circular channels and to make them resources. Now, the main problem we have with traditional wastewater collection and treatment systems is that in many countries they do not exist. They may be outdated, inefficient, and unable to keep with increasing of urban population. So we are not only on a stretch, we are only addressing a very small part of the problem. And we need to have that in conscious because investment by the public sector has been insufficient. Go to the next slide. Now, why we all care, everybody was mentioning the SDGs, but I will try to provide you a simpler angle, which is the inadequate management of wastewater have environmental consequences, human health consequences, and food security consequences for the entire urban population. In environmental health, of course, habitat degradation, entrophification, which is happening with many freshwater bodies in many countries, pollution of hazardous substances, particular persistent organic pollutants, and water and soil toxicity, making it unable to generate ecosystem services. From the point of view of human health, this links to this derives into unsafe drinking water generation, pollution of existing fresh water under the nephratic layer, increased diseases, becomes a vector also, food contamination and bioaccumulation of pollutants. Also, in both cases, both environment and health, we have a significant plastic and microplastic pollution problem, and we're all working together to generate a UN treaty to address plastic pollution according to UNEP. Now, we also have issues of food security. We pollute and are able to reduce or stop the flow of polluted wastewater. We will have not only contaminated water, we will have contaminated harvests, we will have contaminated food, we may reduce the productivity of soil, and even already happening the productivity in the fishery sector, which is essential to food security and livelihood in many countries, particular island states. So the problem is not a single one, it's a series of cascade problems that we need to address. Now, this we were talking about the issue of data. We found this interesting analysis from Green Arendal, where they presented some estimates that are interesting in terms of wastewater production, collection, treatment, and reuse. So far, we only treat globally about 11% of all wastewater. This is very low. Also in plastics, for example, we only recycle 10% globally. So this is a very significant level of concern. We are very far from full circularity, very, very far. Even in stopping the problem, not making it circular, we are very far. In production, everybody's producing, and you can see most populated countries have a significant production in red. The collection, it's ranging between sometimes 0 in most Africa to 50% in developed countries, but that's the highest level. Imagine, even in developed countries, the collection of wastewater sometimes doesn't reach beyond 50%, which is very worrisome, not only for developing countries. In terms of treatment, we're doing a little bit better. Many countries are improving the treatment of water, and this is very good. I think this is very much linked to the value of water. The value of water is increasing, not only in drinkable water, but water usable for industrial and agricultural purposes. And this could be an incentive for circularity that we need to look more carefully. And finally, in terms of reuse, we have a lot to do. Very few countries can do more than 50% of the use of the water, and water scarcity is very important in many parts of the planet. So I think reuse is also linked to sustaining our own livelihoods in the near future, because it will be going into lower levels of abundance, but also increased demand. Now, when we look at the regulatory framework, we need to understand the different, I always put this type of slides when we talk about cities, that there are different, obviously, jurisdiction and competences of different entities at the local and national level. Mainly local, whether you look at the regulation, the pricing strategy, ownership, participation, measures, etc. It's mainly, obviously, on the area where the wastewater is being created. Obviously, rich cities have higher standards in terms of not only local distribution, but also local collection, better management, better controls on levels of pollution, and also investment in treating themselves. So this is very important because many cities invest in these aspects, and they have a significant role. Now, the national level, most of the policies are done at the national level, not at the local level. The tariff setting for the price of fresh water, but also for water coming from treatment, meaning water for reuse, is defined at the national level, and they tend to have different prices. Usually fresh water, drinkable water lower because of public goods subject to the need of everybody and with significant cross-subsidized schemes. But the water treated could be subject to different price, and I will go that deeper because that's linked to the incentives to enable circularity. Finally, whether national or local, in most countries, drinkable water production is done by utilities of different sort, public, private, PPPs, or private. In most cases, they have the drinkable water layer, but not in all cases they have the jurisdiction, competence, or responsibility in the wastewater treatment, which I think need to be included, so the pricing covers the entire life cycle of the water, as mentioned by my colleague from UNEP. So we avoid the division between fresh water and wastewater treatment. It should be an integrated scheme. Continue. Now, I think one key aspect to generate incentive for circularity is that we have a problem in defining the right pricing for water. And this is due to several factors. First, we're talking about a public good. We're talking about that everybody has right to water, so linked to human rights, and also linked to equality and access to affordable and quality water for everybody. So in most of the cases, the drinkable water service is subsidized or cross-subsidized. Now, when we go to wastewater discharge, things start to disappear. You have less incentives, less pricing, policies, less a scheme on how to include the cost of wastewater treatment and reuse into the system. So you may need to have dual pricing, or you may need to have a special pricing system for wastewater, so there is incentives, whether public or private, to engage in the water treatment businesses. So we need to create these opportunities. If the price of recycled water or treated water is lower than the fresh water, nobody would go into that business. So you need to have a different price scheme for the treatment of water, even if it's higher and even if it's subsidized, so we can increase the capacity. This is because obviously in wastewater you have negative market failures and you have negative externalities. So both are present, and also you have government failure. So it's again, when we're dealing with pollution, when everybody's talking about the resource clean, beautiful, everybody's there. But when you're talking about dealing with the X-outs problem, very few people or entities stay there. So it's a key lesson on how we manage this. Now, I think it's important also to note, if you look at the waste hierarchy and different roles, that upstreams the governments tend to be very present, and downstream you start having interest by the private sector to engage in the water treatment. Again, because the water is becoming expensive or because they want to retreat the same water so they don't have a cost. So it becomes an efficiency call. And I think we need to think of how to engage more PPPs and the private sector in the wastewater treatment segment, because they could be, again, be business opportunities for circularity, but we need to create the right policy incentives by looking at the waste hierarchy, because some waste have higher impact and occur at the beginning of the value chain or at the end. Continue, because we have little time. Now, we wanted to say, okay, we have all these problems, of these challenges. Wanted to show some examples of what UNCTAD has been doing on the ground to try to contribute to the challenges we have at hand in terms of wastewater. And I'm going to do that through specific projects that can be more tangible for our colleagues online. For example, I think we can have collaborative treatment plans. This is a private sector angle, not a public sector angle, but it's very interesting because this is what I call double circularity. So we have Mr. Green Africa. This is supported by the UNCTAD SMEP project. And basically, they reuse 80% of the treated water that they collect and reuse for recycling plastic. So it is beautiful. You're doing circularity in the water use and in the plastic. And this is very important because treated water, again, can be very used for industrial purposes and for agricultural purposes and for gardening purposes, more than drinkable water, depending on the level of the treatment. The second point that we have done also, this is also the SMEP project, in certain countries, this is low-tech, frugal innovation, but works, which is obviously using nets or using barriers to capture all the waste that is dumped into rivers, and rivers end into the oceans, and it links to the significant amount of plastic pollution we have in the ocean. We need to use systems, barriers, nets, filters to try to reduce the amount of solid waste that goes into the ocean. And that's very important because that can go into microplastics and different type of pollution. A third example that I think is very new and very appealing is that there are different technologies for treatment, but we can also have nature-based solutions for treatment. In that sense, we have been calling for the use of sea waste-based filters, and this is done at the industrial level, not household level. And I think this is important, that this is coming from a report from the Oceans UNCTAD program, where in many cases, by having one layer on the treatment of water based on seaweed, whether fresh water or salty water species, you can reduce the amount of heavy metals and pollutants because it's absorbed by the seaweeds, and you can dispose them in a different manner. So you avoid the water to bring those pollutants into the system, and you can deal with that seaweed that is polluted in different ways, including incineration, but it's organic. So the beauty is you are absorbing pollutants through organic and biological processes. This paper is also available online. I will go to 3 more examples. One also using treated water to construct wetlands around cities, especially in areas that could be polluted, to start changing the ecosystems and to avoid continuous pollution. There is an example of this is by UNEP, not us, but it's good that we also make propaganda of our partners. Second, we have a very interesting project, and my colleague Enrique can talk more to it, but we can expand the use of ceramic gravity filters. Ceramic is a non-plastic substitute, by the way, and we can use it to make more drinkable water affordable. In my own country, this was very common by traditional means, even using stone, volcanic stones and different type of carbon filters to enable the delivery and reuse of water for drinkable purposes. So this is, I think, a very important low-tech solution that could be available, especially for rural areas in developing countries. Finally, somebody has to finance this. We have discussed the issue of pricing, which I think is important. We have discussed the issue of operations and the need for several government infrastructure to help the participation of the private sector. But there are financial tools available that are already well known. Green bonds, that is a form of debt to invest in green sectors, especially in ex-post use, enabling circularity. And the beauty is the revenue you obtain it in resource, which is a beautiful aspect of thinking of financial circularity. You have climate finances because you can have emissions all over the process. You can have impact investment, again, in many developing countries, investment in water treatment due to the increase in prices and low availability. And also we are seeing a case that is becoming common, but we need to be very careful that sometimes many of these facilities are built, but the technology is not exactly adapted to the local needs. Sometimes they don't invest in the development of the local skills or invest in maintenance. So you build infrastructures, but the entire system to make them effective, sustain them, repair them, and be enabled to run it for at least when you do this type of investment, 10, 20, 15 years, needs to be there in parallel. So you need integrated solutions. So finally, the conclusion is we need to prioritize wastewater treatment, but we need to do more co-management, more co-finance. We need to increase circularity, as mentioned by our colleagues, by enabling better pricing for the X-outs, meaning the water treatment, obviously to deliver on environmental public goals, public health goals, but also enabling trade and development as tools for achieving SDGs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for these very intriguing parallels you mentioned. Talking about waste, we are also talking about, as Graham also mentioned, health, but also the aspect of food security is very, very interesting. You mentioned. Thanks for the low-tech solutions you proposed. Although nowadays we talk a lot about financing and financing locally, also brings us to the big question of localization SDGs. I think it really brings us to sustainability. And Henrique, I know that you are dealing with climate change and sustainable development issues. So I guess you will have some remarks on that. Please come on, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andres, and thank colleagues for this invitation. I will be discussing all of this touches with climate change, right, and emissions, but I'll be touching a bit on the solid part of the problem, on solid waste, including evidence from one of our technical assistance programs, the SMAP, Sustainable Manufacturing Environmental Pollution Program. Can you see my screen? Just signal to me. Okay, cool. Kudos to Elizabeth, who helped us prepare this presentation. Solid waste. I mean, David did a good presentation on leakage, discharges, and a thought on human health. The solid waste is the other side of the coin. I mean, it's correlated to income. The higher the income, the higher the waste. Even though poorer countries tend to have more organic, higher organic share in their municipal solid waste than developed countries, which have more technical materials like dry paper and plastics and metals. But waste is everywhere, and waste is often mismanaged. You have also a very low collection of certain materials that can be recycled, and that includes also paper and plastics. I think the average recycling or collection recycling rate for plastics is under 7% of municipal solid waste, so there's a lot to be done here. And waste will grow more, right? The expectation is only upwards. It's a bit like the plastic story. It correlates also with income, so it's also tough to put a cap on this, because it's because people are joining the middle class in many countries and accessing consumption. So this is a natural result of that, and a lot of this pressure happens in urban spaces. And if you look at what happens with waste globally, the story is not very nice, right? You have only a small percentage that is recycled, and you have another modest layer that is transformed into energy, which is, according, as we mentioned already before, the waste hierarchy is not ideal to recover energy from waste. There are other things that can be done, and landfill and uncontrolled disposal. Uncontrolled disposals are nearly half what happens with waste in the world today. That's very bad. And landfill is also bad because it's a missed opportunity. Even though most waste management contracts by municipalities in the world today pay basically per ton for landfilling. So back to the basics, right? And I find this graph by Helen MacArthur very inspirational to organize thoughts. The colleague already mentioned the other presentation on how we should conceptualize management of waste, right? Both liquid discharge, but also especially solid waste. Breaking it down into artificial clusters, but very useful to imagine the organic side of of things and the technical material side of things, we can imagine strategies, or we can implement strategies, and countries are doing that, to deal with, for example, here with issues like plastics or batteries, or pharmaceuticals, or issues like organic waste, textile residues, tanneries, fish waste, slaughterhouse waste, things that you can all derive value from the organic cycle. And there are many ways many things you can do with that, with those materials, right? And we try to overlay our technical assistance portfolio under the SMAP program in the butterfly diagram, showing how circularity could work in different strategies of circularity, both for our projects on batteries and plastics, but also on tanneries, textiles, and organic waste, as a means of having a more connected mindset towards multi-sectoral waste management and multi-sectoral circular economy roadmaps in countries, where municipalities and cities will be the key delivery channel. If the writing still stays in the screen, sorry. So SMEs are of course the leading force behind innovation for waste reduction. There is a wealth of examples around the world. In Africa, continent, we work a lot. There is a lot of enthusiasm on, for example, black soldier flies producing protein, fiber out of waste streams. We have the problems though to surpass, especially large-scale city managed infrastructure is very capital intensive. It requires specialized knowledge, like engineers and technicians. There are sometimes, depending on the country, some barriers to service mobility, or for example, barriers to recognition of qualifications in some areas, and of course the public behavior, right? We recently put out a short article telling the story that once you commingle waste, once you mix, for example, plastics with organics, you end up losing the value of both streams, or not being able to recapture the value of both streams. So individual behavior and institutional behavior is very, very important. There are some examples of where waste treatment and reuse are being done from our programs. One of them is a grantee of the SMAP program, Mananasi Fiber in Kenya, who is transforming pineapple waste. So we all love pineapples, or most of us do. We eat the fruit, but the leaves stay in the crops, in the fields, and sometimes they actually the volume is too large, is a lot, so it's not enough to just leave it there for refertilization. There's an excess material that is often burnt. So by producing textile fibers out of pineapple leaves, you not only avoid emissions, but you also can indirectly replace synthetic fibers in textiles. For example, you can mix the 15, 20%, up to 30% of textile fiber in cotton, pineapple fiber in cotton, and you never notice the difference in a shirt that you're using. So, and this of course creates jobs, creates new value chains based on waste. So it creates value where there was none before. Another interesting example is to work on secondhand textiles. Secondhand textiles are traded all over the world, especially from the global north to the global south, for a big question of affordability. But eventually, there is textile waste in the end of life, and also trimmings, right? When you send your clothes to tailors, and people do that a lot in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and other places of the world, you get trimmings, and those trimmings accumulate very quickly in markets like Wino in Uganda, and there's no organized solution for textile waste, where, for example, in the world, most of the upcycling capacity for used or residual textiles are in Asia, and especially in South Asia, where East Africa lacks, for example, that type of management capacity for this specific type of waste stream. And it's very important to work on that as well, for its value potential. Of course, you can upcycle textile waste, but also to avoid a very specific type of pollution leakage. As you know, a lot of the fraction of plastic pollution comes from textiles, around 14% in the world. So this is especially of concern. And of course, one thing I find very fascinating is how to derive the organic fraction of a municipal waste into value added, into positive value applications, right? And this is an example of black soldier fly, which is being developed all over the world, in Cambodia, to Brazil. In this case, is in Kenya, in Tanzania, and it's very interesting because once you actually organize a system that of collection, of separation, that you can get hands on the organic fraction, you can transform that material into feed for insects, for example, that will produce protein and then displace corn or soybeans or other pollution-intensive crops that will have a big toll on environment and also on land use. So, but in order to get there, you need a different type of design, right? A different type of design of contracts for municipal waste management. You need to have contracts for municipal waste management that are harmonized, standards that are harmonized across regions. I just had a conversation with the ASEAN Secretariat on this. They're developing a strategy. And you need to reward operators not only for landfilling waste or residues, but especially rewarding operators for adding value or deriving value from what they are doing. And this requires contractual innovation, because nowadays what we see is basically concessions, competitive concessions for companies to collect and landfill municipal solid waste. And we don't want that. We want value to be derived in terms of insect proteins, biogas, biochar, novel fibers, and the many other usages that can come from our residue streams. I'll stay here. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henrique. I liked very much the titles of some of your slides. Waste is wealth, and we all understood, I think, that bad management of waste is a missed opportunity. We have the first question in the Q&R section saying, could we then call waste management a solid resource upcycling? Well, I hope we will be able to call it by 2050 or 60. If I understood correctly, we are not there yet. We have the pleasure to have with us Mr. Victor Koti from the city of Accra, Ghana. He is the Deputy Director of Waste Management Office in the Mayor's Office, and I think he will be dedicated to show us the reality on the ground. And we are very eager to hear from you how you see all these questions from a local government's point of view. What are the main challenges the city of Accra faces? What are the strategies you build to use the opportunities? And after your intervention, I will invite our speakers to react on what you are telling. So please be bold, be challenging, and you have 6-7 minutes to present the case of Accra. Thank you very much for your presence and contribution. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. With your permission, let me turn off my video because my internet is not very stable, so that I believe it will be allowed.
Please do,
Yeah.
please do.
Okay. Okay, thank you once again, and it's a privilege for me being here to share the experiences of Accra. First of all, as you might already know, Accra is the capital of Ghana, and then my organization, that's the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, is the local government authority for the city of Accra. And by law, the municipal authority or the local government authority is responsible for waste management within its jurisdiction, both liquid and then solid waste. So my department, that's the waste management department, has the responsibility for making sure that waste management activities are properly executed within the jurisdiction of my local government authority. Now, Accra is a coastal city, as you might know, and then with a population of close to 2 million including transient population, those on transit, because Accra is a financial and then a commercial hub as well as industrial hub for Ghana. So you have a lot of visitors coming in and out of Accra. And then waste generation in Accra, solid waste generation in Accra is close to 200 tons per day, as I mentioned earlier. And then also, I must say that with the available resources that we have, we will not be able to attain universal waste collection. Our waste collection coverage is around 87%, less than 90%. So it means we have quite about 13% of waste not being collected on daily basis. And over time, this accumulates. In fact, the reason for us not being able to do the collection is that either waste generators or households do not make their waste available to the formal collection system, or they are discarded outside the formal collection system into the environment, and that's quite substantial. In fact, the waste collection have been assigned to private companies who on franchise basis. So by that, they collect the waste and then the corresponding revenue. But the revenue or the service charges are normally fixed by the city authorities in collaboration with the private collection companies. But the collection, however, the collection of the service charges is done directly by the companies, the collection companies who have concessions to collect waste within various zones within the city. And it has been a problem on the part of the waste collection companies, because to them, collecting the waste and then collecting the revenue as well brings some additional responsibilities and then also some costs, because therefore the city, most of the companies are advocating for the city to collect the revenue on behalf of the collection companies, so that they will concentrate more on the actual collection of waste. Now, our waste management challenges, Accra, we have a lot of low-income communities as well as marginalized or informal settlements. And these areas or these communities do not have the infrastructure that enhances or that facilitates waste collection. For example, the collection companies use regular collection vehicles, which are not able, or which they find very difficult to maneuver within the low-income communities, because the roads are not there. The access to households to collect waste is very difficult. So these companies sort of concentrate the activities in the middle, and then the high-income communities, where they can easily collect waste with their vehicles, and then collection of revenue is not very difficult for residents or for households in high and the middle income communities. So what are the alternatives for those in the low income and then the informal settlements? More often than not, they discharge or dispose their waste into the environment, open spaces, water bodies, as well as indulging in open burning of waste. And open burning of waste accounts for substantial greenhouse emission from the waste sector, because in our last city level inventory, for the 2015 base year, in fact, the greenhouse emission from the waste sector is 44%. And that's the highest sector that contributes to greenhouse gas emission, followed by the transport sector. In fact, we know in most jurisdictions, the transport and then the energy sector accounts for most emissions. But in our case, it's rather waste that contributes a lot to greenhouse gas emission, 44%. And as a city, we are working very hard to reverse this narrative, to reverse this trend. And then also, when it comes to treatment, we don't have a lot of treatment facilities or treatment systems in place. So over 90% of waste collected in Accra ends up at the landfill, including organic waste. And that also accounts for emissions of greenhouse gases. In fact, in our inventory, out of the 44% from the waste sector, landfilling alone contributes about 17%. and then open burning of waste about 10%. So that tells you the implication of our waste management activities or scheme to the environment. We have a couple of compost facilities, both within and then outside the city. But however, the city is yet to implement a source separation program. So mixed waste, we continue collecting mixed waste in Accra. So the facilities that are supposed to treat the organic waste still receive mixed waste, and that also poses some challenges to the operators of the facilities, because they have to use mechanical means to separate the organic waste from the other fractions of waste before treatment, and that increases the cost of organic waste treatment, that is composting, and then also compromises the quality of compost, because a close look at compost from these facilities indicates that there are some plastic and then other type of waste still at the final product, still in the final product, and that has been quite challenging. So as a city, we are working at implementing a citywide source separation program, but we haven't gotten there yet, because for now, the sanitation and then waste management bylaws of the city do not mandate or oblige waste generators to separate their waste at source. So currently, we started activities to review our bylaws so that source separation will be obligatory or mandatory to waste generators. And to us, when this is in place, it will facilitate implementation of a citywide source separation program, and then improve the feedstock that gets to the compost, the few organic waste treatment facilities that we have that are available to the city to handle organic waste. And then also, as a follow-up or in vein of implementing a citywide source separation, we also want to implement or deploy decentralized organic waste treatment systems. That's mini compost facilities in various communities where we can get space. The idea is Accra is not a typical farming. We don't have a lot of farmlands around Accra, so we want to promote some household gardening as well as school gardening, and then use some for horticultural purposes, because we have a lot of green spaces in communities in Accra, and want to use compost from these community decentralized systems to green community open spaces, so that the quantity of organic waste that ends up at the landfills will be drastically reduced. And then also, we are in collaboration with the C40 under the City Finance facility. We started activities to implement or to construct a large-scale compost facility closer to the city. And we are looking at a capacity of up to 600 tons per day. We started feasibility studies with assistance of C40 CFF and then the GIZ. In the next few months, we'll complete all feasibilities, and then we'll go onto the financial market to look for funding or financing for our project. In fact, all these are in response to some of our priority actions in our climate action plan. In fact, the climate action plan, we have 5 priority actions in the waste sector, and that includes developing a waste optimization strategy, reviewing city bylaws, separating dry and wet waste, and then increasing access to waste management infrastructure. So some of these the activities we are working on now is looking at separating dry and wet waste, and then diverting waste from landfills. Now, in recent times, we've started having issues with textile waste. In fact, in our waste characterization that we did in 2020, as a developing country, as a city in a developing country, the organic fraction is the highest. We have about 53% of waste being organic, and then 17% plastic, and then textile waste is just about a little over 1%. However, we have a couple of markets within the Central Business District of Accra. That is the hub of second-hand clothes from UK, from Europe, Asia, and then other places. And a lot of these second-hand clothes the imports come with a lot of waste or clothes that could not be used for anything. And most of the time, after picking up or selecting or sorting out the very good ones, there's no treatment regime for the rest of the textile waste that comes in the shipping containers. So they also end up at the landfill, and then some also end up in the water bodies because there's no collection system for bulk textile waste in Accra. And this is a huge challenge to the city. We have organizations like All Foundation and other climate sensitive organizations putting in place activities to reduce the quantity of textile waste that ends up at the landfill. But we are still in the inception or initial stages. We are yet to develop a system for handling or treatment of textile waste. In fact, we haven't even gotten, there's some data there's some data in the system, but as a city, we've not collected our own empirical data as far as textile waste is concerned. So these are some of the areas that we'll be looking to in the coming year. And then
Thank
also, yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I thought I lost you. And then also we have informal waste collectors operating within Accra. In fact, these are waste collectors who use very small collection equipment, very, very low cost collection equipment, and they are very active in low income as well as informal communities. In fact, the activities are more or less illegal because per our laws, you have to get accreditation before you'll be able to collect waste within Accra. However, they are rendering very important services to the city because they are collecting waste that hitherto may not be collected by the formal waste collection companies due to lack of access or the inability of households to pay the collection charges. But these guys, they collect from these households and then they charge very low fees that are affordable and then convenient to households in low-income areas. So as a city, we recognize them as very important stakeholders in our waste collection scheme. So we started.
Thank you very much, Victor. I need to stop you here to give time for a second round of questions. But thank you very much for all these insights. I noted myself several big questions. I would invite the speakers from the international organization to think about which one they would like to reflect on. The city and private companies, PPP cooperation is a very important point you mentioned. It was very important. You mentioned the treatment facility lack and the 90% of the landfill disposal, which needs some solutions. I invite our speakers to reflect on that. You mentioned the organic waste, which is compromised, but might be used in a better way. And already in the questions, I had the reaction from Durban, South Africa, saying they have good practices. So we are happy to connect you to discuss this further. And we heard some good examples from Enrique on the textile. Perhaps you could come back on that point as well. But before I give, and at the end, I would like to come back to you, Victor, once again, on the question of plastic pollution, which was also a question in the chat. So, colleagues, speakers, who would like to comment, suggest, recommend on any on these points what was mentioned by Accra? David.
Thank you. I would say that many of the questions were more about solid waste, but I just wanted to make a point on textiles. My project works a lot on the matter. And on textile waste, you have in West Africa a market for second-use textiles that are reused and repurposed, but you have a significant amount that ends being dumped. Now, there you have different composition of textiles. Many have natural fibers like cotton, but also you have many that have synthetic fibers that are more difficult to recycle. We have been proposing, and this is something that we can present at some point, and it has already made it into the draft text of the fifth draft text of the chair of the INC, International Negotiating Committees on Plastics, which is the importance of obviously circular economy, but also using non-plastic substitute materials, meaning materials that can be recycled, reused, repurposed, or biodegradable, or end of life, such as organic ones. So we have already a set of proposals that we can do at some time of what will be the best materials that can be used in certain economies so they can be better managed. I leave to complement to my colleague Enrique.
Good point, David. And also on the issue of textiles, one thing was noticed, even though our research was in East Africa, specifically in Uganda and Tanzania, we noticed that out of the secondhand clothes, which often come either from Europe, United States, China, or indirectly through sorting centers in places like Pakistan, the total waste or low value contents of those shipments are rather low. So, but you have still a fraction of around 5% of what they call fagia or rags or textile waste, which is around 1 to 2%. That, even though it sounds small, in over time in those very large markets, because the demand is very large for those clothes. I imagine in Ghana it's the same. I think Ghana imports even more secondhand clothes. It comes to a point where you need specific solutions to upcycle textile residues, and those solutions are lacking because they are not found in the general standard waste management system of a city. You need to have a cooperation with textiles producers and to respin this material or to upcycle this material either mechanically or chemically in different ways, and that's a capital intensive investment, but it's much needed if we are to address the specific issue of textile waste. Thank you.
Graham, perhaps?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for some very interesting presentations. I'd just like to make a couple of comments, and a lot of this arises from what Victor was saying, but also other speakers. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity to look more closely at local level regulation and bylaws to support both the wastewater management and solid waste. Yes, there's an opportunity for private-public partnerships, but the challenge comes in managing the different types of private sector engagement that you need to deal with these things. I mean, obviously, if you've got contracting arrangements to organize with a solid waste management company who manage vehicles, it's a very different sort of model that you need to managing small scale enterprises who, as Victor has pointed out, are those who are responsible for collecting the waste in the low income areas. You can't have those two parts of the waste management chain not working together. You have to have good primary collection in the poor communities in order to, and that links into the existing local authority level. So if the local authority have the opportunity to help draft legislation and bylaws that support the engagement of the informal sector, this can provide a huge increase in the amount of waste collected, and of course the opportunities for recycling, because we've heard from many of the speakers that, you know, once you start to combine waste together, that's when it loses its value. The other thing, and this applies both for wastewater and solid waste, is of course both of these, I'll call them commodities, become lose their value the more you transport them around. So you really need to start looking at use locally wherever possible. You know, we'd heard Victor was saying about the use, encouraging decentralized organic waste treatment in cities and urban gardening and these sorts of things. Once you start moving large amounts of waste around, that's when it becomes almost impossible. I was asked years ago to advise the city of Sao Paulo on their waste management program, and they were running out of landfill capacity, and the nearest place was 70 kilometers away by train. So when you let things get out of hand and you let the privatization of the waste sector get out of hand and you don't regularly regulate it properly, that's where you get at the end of the day. Sao Paulo was in a dire situation. Landfills were almost full, and the only option was 70 kilometers away, which, as you can imagine, would put the price of waste management up. So there's a lot more that can be done to support, the sorts of things that Victor wants to do. There's no shortage of good ideas out there from the cities, both in the global south and the north. The idea of all the parts working together and having good bylaws and local level legislation for me is a very, very important part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mona, would you jump in?
Yes, thank you. Just as I raised my hand, so perfect timing. I think from my side, it was of course very insightful to hear about the different experiences, and is interesting to also see the comparisons that are being made between liquid, wastewater and water overall, and then solid waste. I think what we are advocating from UNEP really is around the idea that we want to maintain materials, including water, at their highest value. And so this really takes designing for circularity. So when it comes to water, it's looking at piping systems in different buildings and infrastructure to make sure that we're separating gray water from brown water for different usages, etc. And then when it looks at waste, I completely agree with Graham when it comes to solid waste. The question of separating waste as early as possible is also very useful. But even before we get to waste, if we are to design infrastructure and housing in modular aspects or in a modular design, then we can use these pieces as we move forward. And if we intervene before the demolition of a building, right, so we can deconstruct a building and reuse different components, then we really avoid the waste that's being generated at the end stream, and it really shifts the burden, because it's a very similar conversation that we have when it comes to the use of a building and the energy that's used to heat up a building and or cool it, etc. Right, this is a burden that we are putting on the user. But if we're really to look at the value chain and to look at the decision makers across these steps, then we really have to consider what decisions can we make at the design and inception phases that ensure that we are systematically incorporating the concepts of circularity, reducing waste, and reusing materials overall.
Thank you very much. I totally agree on your point, Mona. Reusing, repairing, recycling, remanufacturing. We use these terms sometimes as synonyms, although they cover different areas, and we have to look at it from a holistic point of view. Victor, I would like to give you back the floor for 3 minutes on 2 questions. One question was about how do you handle plastic as a separate waste category, as plastic pollution? And the other question was what kind of measures you think are necessary to support the informal waste collectors? You mentioned it, and Graham reacted to that, and in the questions there are several questions concerning that. And after your intervention, I will give back the floor for 1 minute concluding remarks for all our speakers. So the floor is yours, Victor.
Okay. Could you please repeat the question, the second question? I didn't get it all.
Yes, the second one is what kind of measures you think are needed to support the informal waste collectors' work better?
Okay, thank you very much. So plastic waste, Yes, as I mentioned, we have quite a substantial quantity of plastic waste. However, we don't have very large-scale formal plastic waste recycling facilities. And then also, we are not collecting plastic waste separately. However, we have informal sector players who salvage or collect plastic waste from the waste stream. And the concentration is the valuable ones, like the HDPEs, the PPEs, and then PET. In fact, the market for PET became quite vibrant recently, about a year or two ago. But previously, there was no market for PET bottles. At the national level, that's from the Ministry of Environment under the EPA, new legislations are being put in place to address the issue of plastic waste, because in Ghana, we do not have an extended producer responsibility system here. So it means producers or manufacturers are not directly responsible for the afterlife of their products, including plastic used in packaging. So there's a national level activity ongoing to come up with legislations to address the issue of plastic waste from the producers' point of view, so that producers will be more responsible. But at the local level, we have the informal sector that is working, that basically works on plastic waste, from picking from the streets, shredding, and then processing before it gets to the larger companies that use them in their processes. And then the informal collectors, as I mentioned in my presentation, the city have started activities to incorporate or to integrate them to the waste collection system. In fact, we started this as far back as 2018. And we organized a number of capacity building programs for the informal waste workers. At one point, we've trained them on health and safety, road safety regulations, financial literacy, and other topics to make them more efficient, because these are people that we cannot get out of the system, and we are trying as much as possible to build trust between us and them, so that at least we can increase our waste collection coverage as well as our recycling rate. However, we cannot have infinite number of informal waste collectors operating in Accra. It will more or less be a nuisance, because they use motorized tricycles that a lot of road users see as a nuisance. So what we are doing is we are facilitating formation of cooperatives among informal waste workers, because we have so many of them, and it will be quite difficult to manage or control or regulate them when they are in their loose associations. So we started forming or helping them to form cooperatives, and the cooperative will be the channel or the vehicle for building their capacities, as well as assisting them to be more efficient. In fact, we've conducted a needs assessment for the informal waste workers, including migrants, because we have a lot of migrants also working in the waste sector, and we're also incorporating them into our society. So all our programs are not only for the indigenes, but for the migrants as well. For example, we've enrolled over 300 informal waste workers into our national health insurance scheme, so that at least they will have access to basic health care. To us, we're also giving them an office space at our department, so that we'll be able to easily interact with them, so that we are bringing them closer to the city, because the historical antecedents as far as relations between the city and informal waste workers was quite hostile. And in fact, so we are trying to build the trust and then the confidence among the informal waste workers, so that they can easily approach the city. Then we can also address their needs. So these are the measures that we put in place so far, to make sure that the informal sector is well controlled or regulated, and then also we can also assist them to be more efficient in whatever they are doing, because to us it's a matter of delivering climate actions, and then also improving the livelihood of whoever citizen we find within our jurisdiction, whether the person is a migrant, informal waste worker, informal someone residing in informal settlement. They have a duty to ensure that their livelihood is dignified. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for these great examples. I'm sure that a lot of people in our audience takes note of these examples. And as I mentioned, I would like to invite the other speakers for just 1 minute, one sentence. What is your biggest takeaway or recommendation to us to go forward on this topic? Perhaps I start with you, Mona, from UN Environment Program point of view. What would you tell us as a conclusion?
Thanks, Andres, for the opportunity. I think for me, it's really good that we're starting to have these conversations in systematic manners, right? We're talking about circularity and what it means for sustainable procurers. We're talking about what it means for engineers and practitioners, for solid waste, and for wastewater. And we're really opening the borders of where this conversation is and what it looks like at the implementation at a local level. So I'm really, really happy about that. And look forward to continuing this discussion, and grateful for the time and effort that you're putting into this work. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Enrique?
Two takeaways by the discussions is, first, that waste management contracts should eventually change, right, from the model of landfilling towards a model of paying more per ton of value addition. This will impact decades to come because the contracts are very long, and they will open the window for a lot of tradable solutions, non-plastic substitutes, new types of protein, extracting energy from organic residues, and things that are not tapped today because of the current flow of waste. And the second point is on water that came to my mind, is that if we're going to move from a world of single-use items or disposable items to a world of reuse, perhaps post-INC, or due to more economic constraints in the future, we need to have our water system clean. So clean standards for water, because we need water to wash vessels to reuse. So we cannot escape that. It's a must-do in order for us to have a workable reuse systems to have clean water. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you very much. David?
Yes, to say that in the case of water, the value of the resource after treatment is going to continuously increase. There will be less water available. We have a scarcity, especially in Africa, in many countries of Africa. Water will be essential for circularity, as Enrique mentioned, in industrial processes, for agriculture, but even for green hydrogen, because you need to do electrolysis of water to get green hydrogen, have green foods in the energy transition. So I think we need to ensure the conscience of policymakers that it is a good business for the state and entities, local, regional, and private sector, to start engaging now, because this infrastructure will provide even increasingly yields in the near future and ensure livelihoods of everybody from urban to rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these wise words and recommendation. Graham, the last word is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. So it's been a delightful meeting, actually. For me, I think it's high time that we start recognizing the importance of the professionals who are responsible for managing waste, both wastewater and solid waste. As my dear friend Victor will tell you, many municipal officers, when given the task of managing waste, saw it as an unattractive area of work that they wanted to do. And it used to be the area of work which most professionals were given to, which they didn't really enjoy. It's high time that we recognize people like Victor, the people who manage wastewater treatment. These people are given higher priority because they have many of the solutions already. It's just that their political masters and their ministries of finance need to listen if we're to move forward with sustainable urbanization, because otherwise, both from the solid waste and the liquid waste point of view, we are going to be spending increasing amounts of budgets just on providing a clean environment for people to live in a healthy and safe manner.
Thank you very much, Graham, for this clear message for the national level. We at the Global Cities Hub, we are always happy to facilitate the discussion between the local, the national, and the international level. And this discussion for us was really a delight. I would like to thank all our speakers, Mona, Victor, Enrique, Graham, David, for your interventions. Special thanks to David and Graham for the co-organization. And I see your hand raised, David, so please conclude our webinar.
Thank you, Graham. I love that. Thank you, Andreas, Graham, Enrique, Mona, colleagues, Victor. Just to say a point, because I was inspired by what Graham just said. We need to make people to understand that people engaged in waste management are not the people that deals with waste. They're the one cleaning. They're the one taking waste away. We are the ones producing the waste. So we need to make them understand that these people has a fundamental role in society that we should be proud of.
On this happy note, thank you for all the speakers. Thanks for the audience, and we are looking forward to work with you in the future on this important issue. Thank you and bye-bye.
Stay. Thank you, Graham. I think it was outstanding. Thank you, Mona, for being here. But we need to do this. Has to become a series. It's becoming so interesting that we need to do more. So this is just the second we organize, and now we have UNEP on board. Perhaps we can co-organize with them next time. But think of new additional angles from the city perspective that we can go in, because I think the type of dialogue we're having is becoming quite interesting. So thank you for leading this, and we talk next year.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was very helpful.
Happy end of the year.
Happy end of the year. Bye.
Bye.